Join me on an inspiring journey through the world of fitness, health, and performance with the Genetic Coach, where I delve deep into the genetic foundations of athletic endurance, discovering how genetics is revolutionizing our understanding of human potential and how we can unlock our full athletic capabilities through a fresh perspective on conventional practices. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome Kimberly Clark, also known as Track Club Babe on Instagram, with over 300,000 followers and growing. Kim is a wife and mum foremost, but she is also a runner and running coach, helping hundreds of athletes achieve their goals through her training plans and advice. Kim has recently had her genetic test done and has started using GeneFit to track her training, making use of the technology to return from some training downtime and illness. And I'm really excited to chat to Kim today from both perspectives of coach and athlete, and to find out how genetics is changing or challenging her fitness journey. So hello and welcome, Kim.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Excellent. So let's jump into the question that always gets asked at the beginning of these kind of conversations. What is your background? And tell us a little bit more about yourself and what led you to the point that you are at now in terms of your running and also your run coaching.
So I basically, when I was a kid, thought I would always be a runner. When I was a kid, I found my dad's old marathon shirts. So I would wear them around the house. He ran 3 marathons by the time he was 13 years old, with
Wow.
his fastest being a 3:07. So in my mind, like, my dad was the coolest. He actually had the world record for that age group in the marathon back then, like in 1969.
Wow.
And so there was a sign at the front of his town with his name on it and saying all of that. So it was, in my mind, my dad was just incredible. And I always aspired to do a marathon. And I thought, oh, if my dad did one and he was so good at it, well, then I probably will be too. And then my senior year of high school, I hadn't played sports all of high school and I had tried out for basketball. They did not let me on. And my senior year, I really wanted to experience the sports team and the sports experience. And so I joined cross country because they were desperate and that was the only team you could walk onto. And I was terrible. And I was also totally overtrained. It was my coach's first year doing it. So, I went from absolutely no activity to doing like 10-mile days, 10 to 12-mile days every day. And I'm
No.
like, yeah, it just totally broke my
Mm.
young female body. I was so injured the whole season. I was extremely slow, both in cross country and in track. And this whole idea of me running so that I could make my dad proud kind of backfired because I was so embarrassed by how I
Mhm.
was performing that I forbade my parents to come and watch me. I said, "You come, I will like sit down on the course. Like, I don't
Oh,
care."
shame. What trauma.
Yeah, it was so bad, and so I would, like, come in last at races. I basically was just overtrained, tired, and injured, so I gave myself stress fractures in my shins. I was in our, like, PT office at my school every day, at the trainer's office for them to, like, lance my feet every day. I mean, I was just a total mess. I was taping up my shins every day or putting hot or cold therapy. I was just a mess, and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't understand how to train. So then at the end of that year, we had just finished track season. A month later, I was telling a guy in my class, "Oh, I'm going to run a marathon when I'm in college," and so college was going to be later that year. But the idea was just like hypothetically, one day I'll run a marathon. And he
Yeah.
said, "Oh, you could never do that. You could never do a marathon." So I was like, okay. And then I found out that the Rock and Roll San Diego Marathon was happening that weekend. So I said, I just went to the expo, I signed up, and I was a marathoner that weekend.
Challenge
So it was
accepted.
exactly. I mean, it was just not the smartest, and I would not recommend it. But I just was like, well, he said I couldn't, and I know I can. For
Yeah.
me, it was marathons were more like an idea of being gritty and just persevering in something. And I
Mm,
never even thought of the idea of running fast, or like
mm.
it being about speed. I actually didn't even realize my dad's marathon times until I was actually running, now in my adult life. So
Mm.
when I finished my marathon in 6 hours and 8 minutes, I didn't realize that my dad did it in half the time. So
So
he
it
was
made
so proud of me.
yeah.
Yeah, he was so proud of me, and I was so proud of myself. Like, I just was like, I'm amazing. Like, I didn't know anybody who had done a marathon in my age group at that point. So
And
I
how
was
old were you at that point?
I was 17.
Okay.
So I quit running for 10 years. I didn't do any activity. I That was it. It was like a bucket list item, and I didn't see really a lot of potential during that, so I was done. And then I decided for like the 10-year anniversary of this whole experience to try a marathon again, see if I could do a little bit better if I trained.
Yeah, you did
And
properly.
yeah, and I always had it in my mind and I always told people, "Oh, I would love to run, but I just get injured when I run. Like I just get shin splints. Like that's what happens with me." And so that was my what I would always tell people as a caveat for why I couldn't run, just because I would get shin
Mm,
splints. So then when I decided to train again, I was terrified of getting shin splints and stress fractures in my shins. And I was being really aware and cognizant and babying them all season. And basically I got back into running and just stayed running. And it's now been a total constant in my life for, I guess, going on 12 years now.
mm. Wow.
So yeah,
Wow.
that's how I got back into it.
Okay, awesome. So, I mean, what got you into the running coaching as such, and sharing advice and just helping other people with their running? Was it just through what you had experienced and potentially a coach dealing badly with you at that young age and how it impacted your outlook on what you could achieve in the sport?
Yeah, so I started running in 2012 again, and I knew nothing. I was learning so much as I was going, and like my learning curve was so steep because I didn't know anything. So I was coming from nothing. And I'm like, as I'm adding things to my training toolbox, I felt like each thing that I was learning was revolutionary for my running. It was like, oh, this is gonna help so much. And I was seeing very quick improvements because of the little tweaks I was adding. And so a lot of the things that I was learning, they weren't being communicated to me. I was, like, learning through trial and error,
Mm,
and I felt like a lot of people who had been running their whole life couldn't even know how to communicate some of these things because that's always how they thought of running and not like, "Oh, this is something I should let somebody know about running."
yes.
To help them. And so, for example, I trained for a half Ironman at one point, and I was trying to learn how to do the clip-in pedals on the bike,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I was with a friend and he was trying to help me, and, like, all I was doing was just falling on the ground each side. I would clip it on one side, try to balance, and then try to clip it on the other side, and I would just fall. And I just didn't understand that you needed to start riding, like, on that one side, you'd have to start pedaling. I was just basically trying to be like a clown balancing while completely still. And my friend was with me and I spent an hour just falling on each side on asphalt too. So it was
Wow.
terrible. And so basically after an hour, I realized, hey, you need to be in motion. And he knew that, but he could never, like, he never realized that I wasn't getting that and didn't communicate
Ah,
that.
yeah.
So it felt like that with running, like that there were these things that somebody who's been running for so long wouldn't even know how to tell me because they just took it for granted.
Mm, mm,
So when I was like finding these things out, I was like, oh my gosh, other people need to get this, and I just felt really strongly about that. And so one of the first posts I did that really went viral at that time was on forum because my now husband, Tyler, who's a very fast marathoner, he's run a
wow.
2:18 marathon and ran at the Olympic trials. He had been telling me for forever, your form is terrible and you need to be working on your form. And I didn't want to because it sounded really hard. And then once I finally started working on it and seeing improvements in like pictures or videos, and then also started feeling improvements in my run and feeling that I was able to hold paces better, then I wanted to share like what I did that helped me with other people to see if like it could
Mhm.
help them.
Mm. Wow, what an interesting story. So, I mean, you obviously took quite a few tips from your now husband as well, but
Yes.
did anything come from your dad in terms of how he trained, or did he just get out there and just pound the pavement, because of that kind of old school thinking, is just get out there and do as much as possible? Or did he share anything, any words of wisdom with you in terms of your running?
My dad actually didn't even end up running as an adult. So I never even saw my dad actually running. It was just more that he was like, in my mind, like a total legend.
Okay.
But I feel like one race I did as a middle schooler, the whole class had to participate in a regional race with all the schools. And I didn't even think he was going to show up. And he was on the other side of a hill as I was going up it, and it was late in the race. And I just hear him go, "Charge the hill, Kimberly." And like things like that. Like he was such an encourager and just really knew how to encourage and press on me to keep going. And so I think that that's like really what I got from my dad, but he just trained as a kid in Wisconsin in the winter, and they didn't have a lot of, research and knowledge about training back
No.
then. So he was just running laps around his gym inside this basketball gym in the school. And so they didn't have, fancy watches or
Mhm.
fancy
Yeah.
shoes. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it was just a different world. That was just like natural talent. Now everybody
Yeah.
can really like finesse it.
Yeah, no, completely. But I mean, there exactly that, just talking genetics, clearly your dad had the genetics
Yes.
for distance running. And you have also said that you just love running naturally as a child. And obviously, with his example, you wanted to be a runner. Have you always had an inkling in yourself that endurance sports is maybe what your body does well at and what you enjoy doing? Maybe you find it a little bit easier over something more like a power sport. So maybe, you were talking about basketball, which is a little bit more of a combination of power and endurance.
And skill and
Yeah,
skill.
and skill completely. But did you, from a young age, sort of have this natural inkling of what your body was good at doing?
I always felt like I really identified with the spirit of distance running. And that's what I really liked about it. I just felt like the type of people who would do cross country or marathons were just like a different type of person. Like they're just like are really mentally tough. They're not doing things because they're getting glory out there. With
Mm,
my cross country races, nobody came to watch them. It wasn't really a team sport in the fun way that the others were team sports. Our uniforms weren't cute. It was painful pretty much the whole way. So
mm,
I just loved the idea of being the person that would lean into that and embrace that. Even before I knew that I could be good at it, I really identified with the mindset of it, which
mm.
and like being able to like really embrace that hurt and find that perseverance. So for me, it was really about running and endurance running being something that I mentally identified with before really even realizing that I may have some genetic talent for it.
Mm. And I mean, mental capacity to actually deal with the pain and, pushing through and having that perseverance is also a genetic thing, actually, when it comes down to it. We always know as an athlete, there are just so many aspects to the genetics that come into play, and also just how your experiences and your environment and how that is contributed to, how you approach your running and the aspects of your running and probably what you experienced as a 17-year-old. But just to go back to, you were speaking about your dad and how, back in that time, there wasn't much scientific information, use devices to track training and look at times and compare data. And now fast forwarding to you as an athlete and all the tools that we have available at our fingertips. What do you use predominantly to track your training and your fitness and your recovery and all those kind of things?
So I use my watch and I also have a heart rate monitor. So be tracking just like the actual stats from my runs. I obviously go by feel a lot with my training. I have to be really intuitive with it. I'm in a very chaotic stage of life as a working mom. So
Mm,
honestly, most nights I'm working until 2 in the morning because my daughter stays at home with us. So I'm literally taking care of her while working. So I get the best uninterrupted time after hours. And so because I'm kind of working on lack of sleep and all those things, I really feel like I have to be really intuitive with how I'm actually feeling and just training like that.
Mm.
I've been loving the GeneFit app as well to just give me that feedback too. So, after I do a session, I can see, hey, was that a productive session? Was that probably too much for me? Because in this a little bit chaotic stage of life, it's really important for me to know how to adjust and how to pivot because all work isn't good work if it's
Mm.
not the right amount. Even looking at how my body handles recovery and just understanding that better has helped me to be more cognizant, be more reactive to what the feedback I'm getting is because and I think in like a call that we had before you were mentioning how my personal genetic profile if it's an overload, it does lead into sickness, which is what I've been experiencing basically this whole time as a working mother runner.
Mm.
I
Mm.
basically, my body is pretty sturdy, thankfully. And even if I took some time off, I can jump right back in without an injury risk. But anything a little bit that's a little bit of an overflow or an overload, and I'm sick, and then when you're sick as a mom and you have a 2-year-old who might be getting sick too, you're not sick for like the normal amount of time. You're like sick prolonged because you're not
Double.
sleeping and
Yeah.
it's just a mess. So
Yeah.
my goal is to figure out how to just stay in that sweet spot so I'm not getting sick, so I can just have consistent training because even if it isn't perfect, even if it isn't at the same levels that I was training before, I don't need to train to that same level. I
Mhm.
just need to train within my current capacity, my current load. And so that's why actually getting, that training analysis with GeneFit has been really helpful because a watch can only tell you so much on its own,
Yeah.
and I always keep my heart rate in the right zones, but sometimes all of these sessions add up to too much for what my recovery potential is at that
Yes,
point.
yes. No, I completely get you. And I mean, myself as a coach, I always talk to my athletes and I say, you always need to listen to your body first and foremost over,
Mhm.
following the training plan or following the
Yes.
schedule, dial into what your body is trying to tell you and really act on that. But, now that I've had my personal genetics done, it's really been an eye opener into why potentially my body has been reacting in certain ways and
Mhm.
why I felt certain things after, certain workouts that I do. And it just makes a whole lot more sense. And I can now understand more of the information about where I was going wrong and where I need to make changes. So, I mean, in your story, what made you or prompted you to get a genetics test done? And were you experiencing particular difficulties that you needed to shed light on further that maybe a genetic test would have done for you? What was the reason behind it?
Really, the reason behind it was because I was curious, like how much more effective can you be if you understand yourself better? And
Mm.
so for me, that was the number one reason. Obviously, I've been, for about 6 years, I've been dealing with different setbacks just in general with my health. So I'm now back to minimal training, but more consistent training that I had been doing even, prior to this last year. And I just wanted to get that genetic testing to better help me to train to my genetic potential, right? And
Mm.
you don't know what you don't know. So getting that insight is really important. And honestly, as I was reading through my different genetic results, I would be like, oh, this is why, this has been going on. Or, it felt like a lot of aha moments
Mhm.
because it
Mm.
was
Light going on. Yeah.
yeah, it was like reading my body's secrets that I already knew, but I was being confirmed. And so that
Yeah.
was really, it felt very validating. Then it helps you to cater to those different things that you've kind of seen a pattern with, but now it's totally, confirmed with genetic testing. And
Yeah.
so leaning into it is going to help me to optimize training better, especially because I truly need every advantage for me in this, chaotic stage of life. Like I can't be
Yeah.
making my training harder for me. I need to have everything going with me and not things working against
Yeah.
me.
No, I think as as we get that little bit older, I think we realize that more, that time is so precious. And,
Yeah.
you can't just step out onto the road each day and think, oh, well, I feel like doing this today. I think I'll just, go with the flow. And, you need to be a little bit more scheduled and structured and specific in terms of what is going to give you the biggest bang for your buck at the end of the day. A lot of people are in that space, whether they be coming from a very sort of beginner background, or maybe they, at the elite level, you in your own space, and this kind of information means so much. With your genetics, can you maybe give us an idea of maybe one or two things that really stood out for you, and what kind of changed your thinking and your current way of doing things?
Of course. So for me, I think one of the things that was most interesting was just the information that I received regarding my training pathways. So my strong suit in that is power. And basically that boils down to I'm really likely to respond well to training that conditions my ability to produce explosive power and speed. And so when I saw that, I was like, yeah, absolutely. I love that type of training. I gravitate towards it. I feel naturally good at it. When I'm doing that training, everything else feels easier,
Mm,
So seeing that was like, no wonder, like, when we would be doing strides at the end of track practice, I would be out in the very front,
yeah,
in this couple
loving it.
hundred runner track practice, and getting my genetic testing made everything feel like it made sense and become very clear for me,
Mm,
So finding out that power and, doing work that targets my fast twitch muscle fibers was going to give me the most bang for my buck
mm,
was really enlightening because then you're able to focus your training in a way that helps you get the results faster, and instead of just kind of banging your head against the wall, trying to make something fit that's not
mm,
your strong suit.
mm,
So for me, endurance, ironically, is not something that I'm as strong with. So I
yeah,
take longer to respond to training that builds your endurance capacity. And
yeah.
so for years, my husband and I have talked about all this, and we basically are opposites this whole time.
Ah,
My husband is very, very good at like the long, slower grinding stuff. His 2:18 marathon PR, there are guys in that same level who have much faster 5K or mile times than him,
mm, mm,
So I think genetically he would probably be in the category where his strength is endurance.
mm,
But even he has a huge aerobic base from being active his whole life, and not like me where I was active 1 year as a 17-year-old and then now as an adult.
mm,
So it's also interesting. Just I don't have a huge aerobic base, and then I've now taken 6 years off. But so I've always just gravitated towards the fast stuff because it feels good. I do see results faster with it. So it's really, like I said, it's been really validating to get that feedback and just to understand how to better structure my training so that
mm,
I'm seeing
mm,
the results that I want, especially because my training time is limited. I'm not getting 2 workouts a week right now because I just don't have the capacity to recover from that. So even if
mm,
I'm getting one hard, good session a week, I need to make sure that I'm focusing in on what's going to help me to make that progress faster and give me
yeah,
quicker results, which
yeah.
is, giving a more power focus. And then the other one I thought was super interesting and also felt really enlightening was the recovery pathways. Recovery is such a huge thing for every single athlete. It took me years to understand the importance recovery played because you don't come from a running or fitness background. I'm an attorney, so my whole life you put in a ton of work to get the results. And
Mm,
so you can never do too much work, right? You
mm,
can never study too much. You
mm,
it's never enough. You go to
yeah,
take the bar and you've studied for I think it's like you study for like a full 2 months for the California bar, right? You study every single day. You're studying until midnight every single night. You're waking up and back at it by 7 a.m. in the library
mm,
and you get to the day of the bar and you feel like you could have months more, you needed like
yeah.
more time. It was all the time that you took, it was still not enough. And
Mm,
so coming from that background, applying that same workhorse mentality to my running for the first several years of my running, had me underperforming, had me totally sabotaging my potential, had me overtrained, fatigued. It was just a mess. I had the right mindset to be a hard worker, but
Yeah.
I overdid it. And I feel like that's actually the case with a lot
A
of
lot.
runners.
Yeah.
They are totally overdoing it. They are
Mhm.
totally overtrained. They're not training the right way. And so it took me being completely overtrained in one season and having no idea why I completely flopped in that marathon. I
Mhm.
ran 20 minutes slower than my PR at the time,
Mm.
30 minutes slower than I anticipated running. And I was totally clueless afterwards. Even having such a negative result, I had no idea what had happened. It took
Mhm.
me months and months to even realize, oh, you were overtrained.
Mm.
This was, I think, my third year of running. So I had not even known of the concept of overtraining at that time. So I was just bewildered. Like my body failed me. Oh my God, I don't have the talent. Like that's the
Mm.
only thing I thought instead of like, no, 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 training plus recovery equals results.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't understand that recovery was even a concept.
Yeah.
So then once I finally landed on my diagnosis, which was overtraining, I was able to then prescribe myself the right type of training, which is I prescribed myself 2 rest days a week until I was healed and out of this overtraining period. I went from running 7 days a week and doing doubles most of those days to run 80 miles a week in that season. I maxed out at 5 days a week, only 5 runs, and I basically completely put boundaries on myself because I was like, you are sabotaging yourself without realizing it. So you don't have a choice but to have these limits until you can get out of this hole that you've dug yourself into.
Yeah.
So that was like really powerful for me. I had to learn it the very hard way, sadly.
Mm.
Taking a very long route to the finish line is harder because you're also wasting years, you're wasting time having to get your body out of an overtraining hole. But it was really powerful lesson. And now I really can advise people better on just like, hey, pull back. If you're
Mhm.
feeling off, pull back before you know it.
Mm.
So that was a long tangent, but so recovery is so powerful. I had no idea before just how powerful. So now looking at my recovery pathways, I see that what I need to be focusing on is my post training inflammation, that I'm likely to experience higher levels of post training inflammation, which impairs my recovery. So just being able to realize that so that I can prioritize that. And like the GeneFit app gives me my action steps for that, which are really helpful. So, prioritizing sleep, at least 78 hours, having a cold shower after a high training session, drinking and taking in the nutrients and nutrition that's going to
Mhm.
help me to reduce
Mm.
inflammation. So just understanding that post training, I'm going to have higher levels of inflammation than maybe the average person. And that's just how I am genetically is like, okay, well, that's eye opening. No
Mm.
wonder it maybe takes me longer to bounce back. No
Yeah.
wonder I need to maybe do a little bit less in training to see better results, and
Yeah.
so I think that just having that information was really, really mostly validating because then
Mm.
I'm able to say, okay, so that's why it's always been like
Mm.
this.
Mm.
Instead of feeling like there's something wrong with me, it's more
Yeah.
like, no, you just need to understand your body to work with it.
Yeah. And it's always so counterintuitive for an athlete to think less is more, you know?
Hmm.
And so it's a very much a mental thing to get around. But that's what I find so helpful. And with the GeneFit app and the scores that it gives you, in that your recovery and your genetics is all baked into the scores that you're seeing. So, like you mentioned when you started off, using those scores to direct your training each day, saying, okay, maybe I overdid it a little bit the past few days. I need to pull back a little bit, get my training balance back in line, back into the green zone. And yeah, I think that has just been a game changer for me in terms of tracking my training on GeneFit. I don't know if you feel the same.
No, definitely. Just seeing my score after each session and then being like, okay, I'm in the right zone. I'm doing the right things.
Yeah.
And just, I think having that immediate feedback that I'm on track is really helpful. Also, that immediate feedback could be like, this was too much. You better dial it back a little bit,
Mm.
allow your body the space for recovery so that way you don't put yourself in a hole, because I know my hole is getting sick. Thankfully, I do not really get injured,
Mm.
but getting sick is my weak spot.
Mm. And just talking a little bit more about the nutrition and the supplements in GeneFit, there is that information in terms of like caffeine and creatine
Hmm.
traits to make use of as natural ergogenic supplements to improve performance. Have you played around with that a little bit and used anything in your training?
Yeah, so I thought that the information regarding caffeine was super interesting for me. So, for me personally, I metabolize caffeine at a medium rate.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's recommended that I take it a single dose an hour before training or a race. So, I had always been taking caffeine like right at the race start.
Mm.
And now knowing it, I'm like taking caffeine during my warm up. So that way, genetically, I process it a little bit slower. I metabolize it at a medium rate. I need to be taking it when it's going to be most advantageous for me. So I have adjusted that, since I got my genetic testing back, and instead of taking it right before I start, I take it before my warm up,
Mm.
or right before. And then I also respond well to creatine. So I've been trying to add that in. I need to be more faithful with that. But yeah, I respond well to creatine, that's exciting because, people love creatine.
Mm.
I'm going to continue to take it for the next 7 weeks before Chicago Marathon, see if it helps me out a little bit. And then with nitrate, I also produce nitric oxide in my body and can benefit from taking that kind of supplement. So I've been putting beet powder into all my smoothies. So I usually have a daily smoothie that has all kinds of fun things in it, like
Mhm.
raw liver.
Ah!
I'm crazy. But so I put beet powder into that smoothie so it's pink and
Mhm.
looks good.
That looks
So
pretty at least.
looks pretty. It hides the liver look.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Okay. So really leveraging, what's going to work for you and not sort of wasting time and money on a whole range of things that you think may help, but you're not actually sure. And I think, yeah, just really directing your efforts in both the training and also your how you support your body and your nutrition and your supplementation. So that's awesome to hear. And just to finish off, just to think about, there are some athletes out there or who are maybe a little bit reluctant to take a genetic test because they may be a little bit scared about what they're going to find out about their body, and maybe the results are going to tell them to do something different that they may not want to necessarily do or change with what they're currently doing. What is your kind of take on that? How do you think genetic testing is going to start changing the face of fitness and training?
I mean, I think it's really powerful because you're able to train to your potential. Without that data, it's hard you could be, you know, basically blind out there. And so I think that the genetic testing is really helpful to really tailor your training, tailor your recovery to what your body responds best
Mm,
to. That's what I've seen for me. I'm a mom and my training time is really limited.
mm,
I, ran my fastest times before having my daughter Clark. I did a 3:11 marathon and my goal was to go under 3 hours. And now training as a mom, my time is so much more limited. So it's really even more important that I focus on quality and
mm.
just on what's actually going to make the biggest difference. I don't have the luxury of just throwing things at the wall and seeing what
Yeah,
sticks at this
yeah,
point. I'm
yeah.
every run that I'm able to get out for, or 10 minutes I'm able to find for strength, is time basically borrowed or stolen from somewhere else. And so
Mm,
I really need to make sure that it's impactful for my results, since I run because I really enjoy it, but I also am running to get the best out of myself. I think
mm,
that's, something that's fun and exciting, and it's
mm.
exciting to goal chase. And so I'm at this point just training to be the best runner I can be in this season of life. And so that's why
Amazing.
for me, there's so much value in really better working with my body, being a better partner to my body in this
Mm,
season
mm,
so that everything I'm doing is getting me closer to the goal, and I'm not doing things that aren't as effective for me. I want everything to feel very targeted
Mm,
to my best running self in this season.
mm.
It may not be my best running self ever because my life is a little bit different, but I can still reach for my best now. And that's why it's even more important for everything I do to be really targeted and purposeful.
I think that's going to resonate with many people out there. I know it does with me, and I just yeah, really appreciate you taking the time to in your busy schedule to run through this with us and shine a light on genetics in training and how it has helped you. Kim, just give us a heads up on where people can find you, where they can follow you, and where they can find more information.
So I have an Instagram page called Track Club Babe. So Track Club Babe on Instagram. I share everything that my husband Tyler and I have learned through all of our marathons. We also have training plans, but I just try to break down running and how to be your best runner on my Instagram. I also have a website, trackclubbabe.com, where we have our training plans that are literally for every single level, every type of runner. We know how precious and valuable your time is. So we want to make sure that your training is working for you. And like we've been talking about here, less and quality is more for the majority of us who have really, really busy lives. So we try to structure training in a way that will help everyone just reach their best self.
Brilliant. And you are also making use of GeneFit. So on your Instagram, you are making posts and of your progress and how you're making use of the app. So if anybody is interested in finding out more about that, they can obviously follow you on Instagram at Track Club Babe or also at genefit.pro. So once again, Kim, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really been an insightful and interesting chat. And yeah, I wish you all the best on your running journey and juggling all those balls that you have up in the air.
Oh, thank you so much. This was such a fun chat. And I'm hopeful that this will encourage other people to get their genetic testing done and just see how much it helps them with their training. So thank you so much, Diane. And I'm excited for how this all plays out for Chicago Marathon in 7 weeks.
Awesome. Well, all the best. We'll be watching.
Okay. Thank you so much. Have a
All
great
right.
day.
You too. Bye.